It could never be said of working women that they sat back and simply accepted the conditions under which they worked. Women were active in the 30s in all kinds of protest movements, including especially anti-eviction crusades, the peace movement, anti-fascist protests, and the Communist Party. They participated in such powerful uprisings as those led by Father Coughlin and Francis Townsend, the latter of which advocated monthly grants to every elderly person in order to forestall the growing problem of poverty among the elderly. But nowhere were women more active than in organizing themselves into trade unions and coalitions that would oppose the conditions they saw around them. The trade union organizing activities of the early 30s, beginning indeed in the late 20s, were fueled as much by scientific management as by the growing number of layoffs. Scientific management, as you'll remember, involved regulating the workers' every movement to provide the most efficient way of doing a job, and it was widely adopted in textile mills, garment factories, canneries, and assembly lines, where malleable and docile women worked. The system promised increased profits that managers would share with workers to encourage them to cooperate. But in practice, it speeded up the pace of work to intolerable levels, and the shared profits and higher wages for workers never materialized. In some industries, like textiles, conditions became so fraught with tension that a worker who scratched her nose or needed an extra minute to go to the bathroom would discover that the assembly line in front of her was completely out of control, or that the loom on which she was working had tangled into an unredeemable mess. Workers responded with wildcat strikes, and even before the New Deal encouraged union organizing, with efforts to organize themselves. After the passage of the National Industrial Relations Act, workers dramatically increased their efforts. Women flooded into the garment and textile workers' unions, as well as into unions of electrical workers and auto workers. Those unions doubled and tripled their membership within a year, so that the unions themselves could not keep up with the new membership. And when the Congress of Industrial Organizations formed itself out of a breakaway group from the American Federation of Labor, union organization seemed the answer to many working women. Unlike American Federation of Labor affiliates, which organized mostly male workers around their particular skills, the CIO welcomed all the workers in a given plant, and with luck, in a given industry. Their unions would represent all workers, including women. The rise of the CIO industrial unions made a huge difference. In 1920, about 400,000 organized women constituted about 8% of all organized workers, a relatively small proportion. Of those 400,000, fully half, were in the garment and textile industries. By 1940, nearly 1 million organized women made up a full 15% of organized workers in American industry. Teachers, office workers, domestic servants, waitresses, laundresses, all tried their hand at forming unions to fight for better working conditions. Union membership now has shrunk to the lowest level since the 1920s, but women constitute more than half of present members and about 2/3 of all new members. Why, you might ask? It turned out that organizing into trade unions benefited employers as well as workers, and organizing women was not entirely bad for the men either. For one thing, It meant that men and women could bargain together with employers as long as they could come to an agreement. Employers did not need to fear wildcat strikes. Unions, in turn, kept their members in line. Male leadership negotiated for women, maintaining a disparity in wages and ensuring that women did not undercut the wages of men. But that benefited men too, for if employers could not hire women at a fraction of the male wage, they were more likely to turn to male workers. And organizing women into unions maintained occupational segregation. Union and employer together decided which jobs went to which sex and how much each job would be paid. Their agreements stabilized the occupations in which men and women worked, created separate male-female seniority lists, and discouraged both sexes from crossing gender barriers. Curiously, unionization did not challenge women's family responsibilities. Rather, as Bessie Abramowitz-Hillman has demonstrated, they extended those responsibilities into the public sphere. Bessie Abramowitz, the wife of Sidney Hillman, president of the Amalgamated Clothing Workers Union and a loyal friend of FDR, had been largely responsible for organizing the 1914 strike that sparked the Amalgamated's existence. Then she became Mrs. Hillman and briefly settled into child-rearing, giving up her leadership position in the union. Though she continued sporadically to organize and remained active in the union's women's auxiliary, it was not until the 1930s that, her children almost grown, she turned to organizing laundry workers. Rose Posada, recent immigrant, anarchist, and a woman with an unorthodox history of relationships with men, demonstrated a deeply felt consciousness of women's needs when she went to work as an organizer for the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. A dressmaker by training, she joined the union in the early 1920s, working her way up to become first an organizer and then a vice president of the ILG. As an organizer, Posada developed innovative methods for attracting women to the union. These methods included shaming men who refused to take women seriously and recognizing that women's needs were different from those of male workers. For example, she encouraged striking women to suspend their protests over the Easter holidays because they would need their wages to buy new clothes for their children. Once, she persuaded her parent union to provide the children's Easter clothes so that women could remain out on strike. To discourage women from scabbing against strikers, she pelted scabs with eggs that would drip over their clothing. She knew those women would go home rather than to work in damaged clothing. On the executive board of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union, she scandalized her male colleagues by insisting on respect. When she didn't get it, she resigned after a decade of struggle with them. Still, women could not move their unions to commit themselves to sex equality in any form. Unlike the garment workers' unions, which had initially begun the push to organize women, there were few women organizers in most industries. Except among the electrical workers, a remarkable exception because females formed the majority of electrical workers organized into unions in the 1930s, unions tended to ignore issues of concern to women. Paid maternity leave and childcare, both subjects of European intervention by this time, remained unspoken for American women. Nor could women negotiate shorter days for nursing mothers or parenting. Instead, everyone assumed that marriage and certainly childbirth would simply lead women to give up their jobs. There was no need, therefore, for paid leaves.